Welcome to Shooting Straight with Brad and Casey. I'm Brad Carlyon, your Navajo County attorney, and sitting in today for Sheriff Casey Clark is David Clouse. Thanks for taking Casey's place today.
No problem. Glad to be here.
And our guest for this episode of Shooting Straight is Navajo County Manager Glenn Kephart. Glenn, thank you for joining us.
Oh, Brad, thank you very much for having me and David. I look forward to having a good discussion.
Well, it's July, and for our state and county government, that means a new budget. What did the new budget for Navajo County look like for this coming year?
Well, thank you for the opportunity. Actually, the budget for this year was a positive note for the county for the first time in several years. We have made we've had to make some tough choices in the past, as you are very well aware. And from 2008 to 2018, the county cut their forces by 16% due to the downturn in the economy, the state shifting cost shifts to the county, and last year we had to actually cut some programs.
Yeah, I felt one of those.
Yeah, I know you did, and it was tough for everybody, and it was a tough community conversation.
Just those programs that were cut. The one that affected me directly was my child support unit was cut, and the AG is picking up the slack, but I don't think quite as effectively as we were. But what was that other program?
For juvenile detention, we discontinued that program from a county service, and we transported our juveniles now to Florence.
And is that resulted in much of a savings?
It is. It is resulting in close to the savings that were projected, and it allowed us to cut $2.5 million collectively last year out of our budget. And what that did is basically helped us be sustainable for the services we're providing, equate with the revenues that we have coming in. And this year, we're able to move forward with a flat budget. We didn't have to ask departments and offices for additional cuts. And we actually took in a little more revenue than we had projected. The state shared sales tax was in a positive note, and also the county sales tax. So I bring that up because it was a good year to present a budget and continue to provide the services that we do. And if this was our current state, I'd say we have a sustainable budget for the services we provide. And that was possible because in the past, the administration and the team were looking ahead at the economy and planning, and we planned for this day.
So looking ahead now, what do revenues and services look like, the best you can tell, into the future?
Unfortunately, our good fortune is, it looks like it's probably short-lived. Many people in the community have heard about the closing of the NGS power plant.
NGS is?
That's Navajo Generating Station, and that's in Coconino County.
So how does that affect us?
Yeah, that's a good question, because how does a power plant in Coconino County affect Navajo County? Well, it does, because almost 100%, it's a coal-fired power plant, and almost 100% of the coal generated and mined for that generation station is mined from the Kayenta coal mine, which is in Navajo County. That generates about $1.6 million of revenue for the county each year, as that coal is sold from the mine in Navajo County to the power plant in Coconino County. And then in addition to that, and it's all tied together because we're seeing a decline in the coal industry. We're not the only ones in the country to have experienced this, but it is our issue now. And Cholla Power Plant is scheduled to close by 2025, and it could close as early as next year. We don't know for sure. Those two industries combined closing down cause us to lose about $2.5 million in future general fund revenue.
Is it going to be even worse than that when we lose all these jobs, mining coal at Peabody and all those jobs at the APS Cholla Power Plant in Joe City?
Yes, for sure. People will have less money. If people don't have jobs, it affects the entire economy, as you're well aware, and people's spending ability goes down. They struggle to buy the basic things that they need, and that affects the overall general tax revenue, and there's a lot of secondary effects beyond that $2.5 million direct loss.
So what does $2.5 million further cuts to Navajo County look like?
Okay, that's a tough one. It is something that we need to look at, though, because we are planning ahead. The $2.5 million to be cut from our general fund would mean that we'd have to reduce our staff by 20 to 25%. And remember, I said between 2008 and 2018, we already reduced staff by 16%. And some of that you would say is some belt tightening is healthy, but we've reached a point, like we said, last year, we had to actually start to cut services. There's no more room to tighten our belt. So if our revenues drop by another $2.5 million as projected, it would mean significant cuts in services unless we found a replacement for that revenue.
So I'm hoping you've looked at replacements.
Well, we've looked at the full gamut of possibilities of how do we address this issue. And one of them, quite honestly, and it's a painful one for me to say, would be a forced reduction of services.
So what kind of services would you look at to reduce?
Well, in the past, when we made reductions, we cut most all services in the county. And you know that very well, as your office was cut back, and I know you're stretched very thin. And that is true across the county. We've met with all of the offices and departments and talked to them. What would it mean if you had additional cuts in personnel? And across the board, they tell us they don't know how they would continue to provide the services that are mandated by the state for us to provide. In the past, when we made these cuts, public safety was held whole. It's our largest expenditure out of the general fund, and that includes all the services. And David, I know you can provide more on this, but this time around, given that the public safety would have to be included, we just don't have room to make cuts across the board to find $2.5 million.
And how much does the sheriff's department, the jail, the county attorney's office, courts, probation, what percentage of the budget does this public safety make?
That's about 52% of the budget. So you can quickly do the math and know that you can't make a 25% or a $2.5 million reduction to the remaining 48% of your budget. It's just not there. So hopefully the forced reductions is not something that we have to do. We've looked at the possibility of economic development to make up some of the losses, and I'm very optimistic on the economic development front on a longer timeline.
So not this 2 to 5 years.
Probably not the 2 to 5 years. Maybe we start to see some stuff in the 5 years, but in the 2 years, I mean, it takes longer than that for a significant development just to get up and running. If we were to get, say, a potash mining, that might be 4 or 5 years before we actually start to see revenues from that.
Yeah, we've been talking about potash for 12 or more years.
Right.
And still haven't seen it. What other potential economic development areas do you see?
We have been working to do everything we can to make the county attractive for economic development. We already have an extremely high quality of life, which I think is one of our best kept secrets, or maybe our worst kept secret, because not as much good employment is moving here as we would hope. But the one shortcoming that we do have is in our broadband, the connectivity. And we've been working with a consortium that includes the libraries and school districts, both in Navajo County and Gila County, to build a strong broadband network. And we're in a procurement process right now to hire a firm that could do that. And so that will be helpful as that's coming down the line. And we also have some tremendous potential with our old paper mill site in Snowflake Taylor that has railroad access, it has natural gas, it has good electricity, it has good access to the highways, both 77 and 277 and 260, close to I-40. We have the Cholla power plant, that one of the issues on that, and I said that they're scheduled to close by 2025, but it could be sooner. We're working to make sure that we can find a replacement industry so that there's not a significant downtime, and hoping that Cholla can stay open as long as possible, because that is a wonderful site. It's got railroad access. It's on I-40, and it generates and transmits out a tremendous amount of power. That power also can come in, be reversed and come into the plant for a significant industry. So there's been a lot of movement and thoughts in Winslow, some thoughts about an OSB plant, and we also have our forestry issues, which are at this point an untapped potential, a potential that got shut off years ago, but it needs to start back up.
We've been working on for 10, 12 years,
Right.
and keep running into roadblock after roadblock.
Yeah.
You also talked about looking at potential revenue sources to help mitigate these shortfalls that you project. What revenue sources have you looked at?
Well, we have, and our Board of Supervisors have asked us, understanding this, to look at all possible revenue opportunities. And when we do that, county doesn't have as many opportunities to collect revenue as maybe the cities and towns, but predominantly we get our revenue from property tax. Interesting note on that, though, out of your property tax dollar, the county only receives 8 cents of that dollar. So, and we have the 4th lowest property tax in the state, and we also have the 4th lowest property values in the state to go with that. So,
And there's a big difference in those property tax rates. What rate are we at now?
the exact rate slips me right now, but what I can tell you is, as the 4th lowest, we're capped. You'd say, why don't we raise property rates? But in 1980, they capped property tax rates at what it cost back then. And so our ability to raise additional property tax is limited. We can do a cost of living adjustment each year, which would be about 2%, and it would generate about $130,000 for us, maybe.
And that's a drop in the bucket in your $2.5 million projected shortfall.
Well, yeah, exactly. And if you
And we're at less than $1 per valuation, and Pima
Right.
County is over $4.50.
Pima County is significantly more, so
Where's
there's a
the-
big gap.
Not much equitability there.
Well,
All right, so
that's our
you,
system.
you can generate 120, 130,000.
And maybe some additional in fines and fees and charging the towns and cities more to house inmates, but you're still at less than 10% of our problem. What you said is $2.5 million.
So I know that the board at their first meeting in July is going to put on the ballot a jail tax district. Can you explain exactly what that is?
Sure.
And how that would help?
Yeah, we are allowed to form a jail district in the county, and the way that works, and people sometimes wonder, does a jail district, does that mean we're going to build a new jail, or are we going to renovate the existing jail? And the answer is no. What we're looking to do is create a sustainable funding source for public safety, and the money that the jail district generates would allow the money the general fund provides to fund those services, a portion of that to come back to the general fund. And it's a rather complicated formula, but the bottom line is a jail district tax, which is a 1/3 cent sales tax on the goods that we currently provide, that we receive taxes on. That jail district tax would generate about $2.3 to $2.6 million back to Navajo County's general fund. So it basically would keep us neutral with where we are today.
And the board had a choice in presenting this to the taxpayers of Navajo County of doing a property tax or a sales tax. Why did they choose the sales tax?
Well, the sales tax, I think personally, it's advantageous for the residents and more fair to the people who live here, because we do have a lot of tourism, and it affects the level of public safety we provide. Would that be fair, David? I mean, if our guests and our tourists and
Yeah, you know, you mentioned a lot about tourism is a big part of Navajo County, and with that, we always welcome people visiting Navajo County, but it does generate calls for service from the sheriff's office, especially in the summer months like this when we have campers and ATVs and UTVs. It generates.
And you have your plane searching for people starting fires
Yeah.
when there's no
Oh, my,
burns.
yeah.
Then if the forest service or the forest is closed and there's no fires, then it creates more of a patrol for us, and more people generates more calls for service.
And more people in your jail,
And it just kind of triggers all those other things that unfortunately sometimes may require an arrest and fills up the jail, then takes the deputy off the road and
takes one of my prosecutors and takes the judge and oftentimes a probation officer, and it just escalates.
for months afterwards from one call.
So it seems more fair, doesn't it? I mean, we have I-40, we have the Show Low, Pine Top area, we have Winslow, we have the Navajo Nation and the Painted Desert, and we have all those attractions that people come and see. I like to think that sometimes I'll leave my office in Holbrook to go out and get a hamburger. A $6 hamburger is going to cost me 2 cents more. And that's true of everybody
2
coming.
cents?
2 cents on a $6 hamburger.
Okay.
And that's true of everybody coming through I-40 who stops. And if people stop at a hotel room, you might ask, would it affect the number of people who come here? On a $120 hotel room, it's 40 cents. My guess is most people aren't even going to know it. And I'm kind of amazed, math is a thing for me, but that 2 cents and 40 cents, that it generates enough revenue to make up our $2.5 million, but it does.
And we would still be a lower tax rate than, like, say, the Valley was, especially for hotels and other costs.
Oh yeah, the overall cost. I mean, the cost of living here is so much reduced over other places. So I think, in my opinion, it would be affordable, but I think more importantly, Brad, I think is we know we can project what the future, the closing of NGS isn't a question mark anymore. The current owners are going to close that down December of 2019. That's just a little over a year from now. Cholla is planned to close. We know that those things are happening. We're working on economic development, as we discussed, and we hope to get fortunate in that. But it's our obligation, I believe, to let our public know that we are looking ahead. We're not going to wait till 2019's budget year and say, whoops, we don't have any money left. We have to cut all these programs. And the public would say, how come we didn't know about this? So we're looking ahead, and we're trying to inform the public, this is what it looks like, and then provide some options. And right now, one of those options is a jail district. And if we do a good job of educating the public, they would have the opportunity to decide. The way the jail district timeline lays out is in July, as you mentioned, the board would be going forward at a request from the sheriff to create a jail district. That would start a public comment period.
So how can people comment? Is the county going out in the community? Do they have to come to a board meeting? Can they send emails?
Yeah.
What is that process?
Yes, and you can help me with that because you know very well that the process would be that there will actually be a public hearing on August 14th. People can come to that meeting and provide testimony in person, or they can provide written testimony in advance of that meeting and make it part of the record. And then at that meeting, the Board of Supervisors would affirm or not affirm the resolution that they considered earlier in July with forming a jail district. If they affirm that resolution, then that would cause the process to move forward for a November election in which the voters of our county would have the opportunity to make a choice.
So is Navajo County, besides having that August board meeting when people can learn more about the jail district tax and put in public comment, are they also going to go out into the community to get public comment and answer questions?
Absolutely. And we'll be designing that as we go along. But up until this point, we have already met with, prior to knowing what the solutions could be, we have met with every town and city and other people in the county, including Show Low, Pine Top Lakeside, White Mountain Apache Tribe, Snowflake. We have Taylor scheduled, Holbrook, Winslow. We will be meeting with the chapters and the villages and Navajo and Hopi, and to educate them on what it means when NGS closes and what it means when Choya closes and what that can look like and what some of the opportunities are. We will continue to do that. Moving forward in the next few months, I expect that we will be continuing that educational effort on what is our current state, what is it in the future, and what are our opportunities and what are our choices, quite honestly.
So it sounds like not to try to oversimplify it, but it sounds like it comes down to a choice between taxing ourselves an additional 1/3 cent on the items that are now taxed, or having the services provided by the county cut.
They would need to look differently. I mean, you can't cut another 20 to 25% of employees. I mean, that would be possibly 80 employees out of a staff of, well, total 600, but we only have 300 and some in the general fund. And when we made the reductions from 2008 to 2018, when the county made those reductions, they kept public safety whole. There weren't any cuts made in public safety.
So David, how many deputies on the patrol side does the sheriff's department have?
Yeah, currently in the sheriff's office, what we call sworn, that are peace officers, certified peace officers in the state, we have roughly 45 to 50 that are sworn, and that includes from the sheriff to the newest recruit in the academy.
So there would be 8 to 10 deputies that would be no longer with us.
That's correct.
How would that impact or affect the ability of the sheriff's department to provide services and to protect the citizens?
That would be a devastating blow to, we're already a very small department compared to other, sheriffs or county sheriff's office throughout the state. But geographically, we're one of the largest in the state.
10,000 square miles.
Yeah, it's a lot of miles to cover. And if we were to lose 8 deputies, that would be equivalent to losing like 2 squads, which would be a sergeant and 3 deputies, a sergeant and 4 deputies, or our criminal investigations division.
How do you think it would impact response times?
And that's another thing we talked about, the geographic, the many miles we have to cover. In some employment centers or different work positions, if you lose an employee, they can just move one window over. But a deputy will have to, if he's now going to cover somebody else's shift, or if he's going to cover for another person, he has to move 40 miles instead of just moving one position in an office over. 40 miles is a long ways to go if you're responding to an emergency type call.
And time.
Yeah, and time.
I imagine your overtime would start to go way up, which would minimize cost savings, because you still have to respond to the calls. You can't say, well, my shift's done, I'll come back tomorrow.
And that's the thing, if we have these reductions in staff, the phone's not going to stop ringing to that dispatch center. We're seeing our calls for service won't go down, but our workforce would. And response times, which we have been working on, and we have been minimizing and reducing our response times over the last 3-4 years. And then if we have a reduction of 8 deputies, we could see that double or triple in response times. If we don't have someone to cover a community as far out as Heber or Snowflake, and then the deputy has to respond from Show Low, that's a long ways to travel, and especially in an emergency, it just wouldn't be good.
Then how do you do that kind of reduction in your jail?
And again, there's another problem is the phone keeps ringing, the arrests still need to be made, and then we're often mandated or required by law to make certain arrests. And if we have a reduction in jail, we just wouldn't have the staff to do it, because it takes minimum number of detention officers, no matter the situation, because you have to have 24-hour
So there would
monitoring of these inmates.
be people on the street that shouldn't be on the street.
Yeah, it'd be a
And that question you ask becomes even more complicated because the jail at times, and this past year I said we had a pretty good budget year, actually made money for the county by housing federal inmates. So if you cut jail staff and you take away your capacity, to make that revenue, and the problem gets even more challenging. I'm not sure how to even process that at this point.
You know, we're running out of time. It's gone quickly. Glenn, thank you for joining us this
Thank you.
afternoon. We may have to have you back again to talk about this a little bit more. And we want to thank you for joining us on this month's Shooting Straight.